Well, to get more insight, we can speak to Senior Lecturer in Economics at Lancaster University, Renaud Foucart. Thanks so much for your time. All ears on Sébastien Lecornu's first speech today. What do you think he needs to say to avoid these calls of no confidence growing?
I think 4 words: suspend the pension reform. This is really what the Social Democrats are waiting for. They said at the beginning, before Lecornu #1 government, what they wanted was to have this suspension and to have a prime minister who accepts to rule the country with parliament, so who doesn't decide to engage the responsibility of government, the infamous 49.3 article. Lecornu has said he's ready to do that. So if he does that, he should have the abstention at least of the Social Democrats, and at the moment also the right wing, so Les Républicains, they are utterly divided. They voted together not to join the government, and 5 minutes later they had 7 of their members in government, but they are also very unlikely to vote against. So I would say, just like those 4 words, I suspend the pension reform.
Now, the pension reform was one of the few reforms that Emmanuel Macron pushed through, and really pushed it through, all the while telling people it was a necessary measure for the country's economy. I mean, if that's rescinded, where does it leave the economy as this new government is expected to propose a new budget?
It leaves the economy in limbo. So postponing to 2027, because the change in pension age was gradual, it's not a massive cost in itself. We're talking about €500 million. It's peanuts as compared to the rest of the problems of France. But the problem is indeed that Macron was elected and re-elected on the idea of having a pension reform, and that the aging of the population and the general cost of aging, including pensions, is the #1 reason for the problems of the budget of France. And so the fact that it's impossible, despite being elected twice, to actually pass the reform is sending a very, very strong message to the other parties that you cannot touch that. And so whoever is in charge of France in 2027 will inherit the same problem, exacerbated, but without any trust that even if they are elected on a platform to reform, this will survive the anger of the French voters and also of the other French politicians.
So give us an idea then, if we're kicking this can down the road, I mean, where is France's economy? I mean, some in government would say, they're facing a gargantuan task and it needs to be addressed urgently. Others say things aren't quite as bad as we're being led to believe.
Things are, in terms of emergency for today, we're not at a time where the IMF can come tomorrow. This is largely because France has borrowed money for very cheap during the time where interest rates were very close to 0%. The problem is that now, with this 6% deficit coming, every time the government is taking new debt, it's paying more and more on additional debt. So the reason why acting now was perhaps a good idea is that acting now would have meant that whoever gets in charge in 2027 would have inherited a country in which they could do something else than just cut spending and increase tax. What this would do, if this Lecornu government survives somehow in this strategy of doing nothing until 2027, is that whoever gets in charge of the country will be in a situation that will be a time for a form of either massive tax increase or massive spending cuts, which is, of course, a recipe for disaster in terms of popularity. So I think that's why the parties like Social Democrats, Les Républicains, were, in my opinion, a bit misguided to censor Bayrou, because Bayrou was this almost messianic figure. He was ready to say, I sacrifice myself, I will do all the dirty jobs, and then they would have inherited some.
Unfortunately, a bit of a connection difficulty there.
No, they might get in power, I think.
Sorry, we had a slight delay. Yes, we can hear you again now. So you're just telling us how they maybe made the mistake of dismissing Bayrou in their calculations.
Yes, I think they had this man who was willing to say, I do all the hard job, and then you will inherit a country you can govern in 2027. And now, it can be a Bardella prime minister, it can be a Glucksmann, a social democrat prime minister. This person's first job will have to deal with an emergency budget.
And what's left to play with when it comes to this emergency budget? I mean, there was that French economist, it's now been dubbed the Zuckman tax. He suggested putting 2% on the wealthiest people with €100 million. I mean, where are we on that? Would that not be an easier way forward?
I don't think this is something that anybody seriously consider as a source, a major source of income. So the point of the Zuckman tax was something that I think is absolutely fair, is to say that people in France are upset by the fact that the very, very top earners pay relatively little tax as compared to people who earn a lot of money. But the problem of the Zuckman tax is that it was based on taxing basically 5 to 10 people. Like you really have the names of those people. And those people have very mobile capital. So what is true is that there are some loopholes in the French tax system, including a law on the holding. That means that those people can spend their money pretending this is the business money and not their own money. And this is one of the things that Lecornu should announce today, which is a reform of this loophole. I think this is something that visually gives what the Social Democrats wanted to get. But of course, it's not the Zuckman tax. And the Zuckman tax is, I think, a very valid and serious idea, but it should come at an international level.
Are there other elements that you see that should be or could be added to the budget that might provide a way through?
That might provide a way through to the survival of the government. I think the main element of Lecornu will be not to make people too angry. And so in terms of having Les Républicains stay on board, they don't want to have something that is too visually going against their agenda. And that means that, for instance, in terms of the interior minister, they will want somebody who has a strong vocabulary and law and order. But it's also a bit tricky because Les Républicains, they would like people to regret Bruno Retailleau, so their own interior minister, because he wants to run for president. And so for the Social Democrat, it will really be about giving them a chance to say in 2027, we won. And I think this is something they could do. I think the big losers of this government might very well be Mélenchon's France Unbowed, because they've been saying no, no, no to everything, and they got nothing. While if the Social Democrats gets on board by staying a bit outside of government, but they can come to 2027 and say, look, we have something that helped us tax the rich. We get the suspension of the pension reform. We are the serious people. We are the real socialists that can actually manage a country. They will be in a very strong position. So I think this is the kind of thing that Lecornu could give them and get a win-win deal.
Indeed, a lot of people looking at those future presidential elections. However, we did see the addition of one or two technocrats to this latest government. I'm wondering how you feel about the former head of the SNCF, France's main transport train network. He is now the Labour minister. I mean, it's a group that has been quick to protest in the past. What impact, what influence do you think he could have?
I think it's a bit of a sense of Italy, does it? Like this idea of bringing people who are seen as apolitical when they talk about reform is giving them much more credential. And also we talked about the presidential election. You have those people who are in charge of very contentious business, but who don't seem to have high personal ambition. So I think having people who send this image of we are technocrats, we are here to save the country, and as Lecornu says, the only goal is to get through the crisis. We don't have any other agenda. Is hopefully giving them the kind of strength and support that will lead them not to be too contentious and not to lead to many strikes and many highly controversial debates.
Finally, their goal is to get through this current crisis, but the cost of all this political instability for France?
So the first cost, I think, is a political cost. As I said before, which show that France, even if you win an election, even if you win a second election, you will look back at the mandate of Emmanuel Macron, the two presidential mandates, and I would struggle to find a big domestic reform. Macron number one was, I'm going to change tax more carbon, tax less work. He couldn't do that after the yellow jacket. There was a pension reform plan cancelled. Macron 2 was about a pension reform cancelled again. So if you run on an unpopular platform, can you really change things in France? And I think it's very important because the next presidential election, like a lot in Europe, is partly about what do you think about parliamentary democracy, about democracy. When people will choose between Bardella and somebody else, it's always the same question that comes. And historically, there was this Republican front saying, no, we are the Democratic Party, we fight for a democratic way of doing things, and they are not like us. Can you still do that? Can you still say that the same way in 2027? I think that's the number one challenge of the Lecornu government now, show that democracy still is a winning formula.
Okay, Renaud Foucart, we'll have to leave it there. But thanks so much for your time and speaking to us.